We're going to explore for evidence of former glaciers in Tioga Terrace, Apalachin, New York. The last glacier that was in this area started to shrink and melt away 12,000 years ago. It was 3,000 feet thick here in the southern tier, and these glaciers carved out U-shaped valleys to form this area. They also carved out the Finger Lakes. When the glaciers melted, there was a release of a lot of weight or burden, and due to this release, linear cracks appeared in the shale rock. These cracks in the rocks helped to form valleys and gorges. We are going to discover some of this evidence in Glann Creek in Tioga Terrace, Apalachin, New York. The trail starts at Glann Road and goes along the creek up to Highland Drive. We're going to start at Tioga Hills Elementary School and walk up Glann Road until we see the entrance to the trail on the left side. The distance from Tioga Hills Elementary to the Glann Creek trailhead is about 500 feet. This is a pedestrian-only trail, no vehicles allowed. Walk up to the chain link fence and take the trail on the right side of the fence to go down toward the creek bed. This is what the trail looks like from the top of the hill. While we are walking along, let's talk about some of the words we will use to describe the rocks and formations we will see. Sedimentary rocks are made when sand, mud, and pebbles get laid down in layers. Over time, these layers are squashed under more and more layers. Eventually, the layers are lithified or turned to rock. Shale is a fine-grained sedimentary rock that forms from the compaction or pressing together of tiny silt and clay-sized mineral particles that we commonly call mud. Fine-grained sediments were deposited in a shallow sea, and these sediments formed layers of a soft rock called shale. Shale is distinguished because it is made up of many thin layers. These layers are formed when the fine-grained particles settle, which can only happen in quiet water. The sea floor or the bottom of a lake are examples of this. Here we're going to cross the creek and continue on the trail on the other side. Here we are on the other side of the bank, walking up to the trail. So let's talk a little bit about glaciers. Glaciers are huge masses of ice that flow like very slow rivers. They form over hundreds of years where fallen snow compresses and turns to ice. Today, glaciers cover around 10% of the Earth's total land area. During the last ice age, they covered 32%. Brr! Glacial ice can be hundreds of thousands of years old, which make it a valuable resource for assessing climate change. By extracting and analyzing the ice, scientists can learn about what the climate was like on Earth thousands of years ago. The creek bed is filled with rocks. Some of the larger rocks were deposited by faster water, and some of the finer ones settled out of the slower water. These rocks have been broken up by a process called erosion, and that is the constant impact or beating of the rocks by continual water pressure. Here's evidence of shale layers, fine-grained shale, in the creek bed. Shale can easily split into thin pieces along the layers. Can rocks tell a story? Look for clues. Use your imagination. The shape of the rock, its size, width, or length, and the grain size tell the story of how it was created. Patterns, cracks, or smoothing tell how it changed over time. Fossils reveal the date of when it was formed. This shows the layers of shale. There is a long, very uniform, straight edge that has split through the shale. It helps to understand how this was formed. What happened was fine-grained sediments were deposited in a shallow sea. They formed many thin, fragile layers of rock called shale. We will look at some fossils to see ones that were deposited in the shallow sea. Grain size is the size of particles that make up the rock. Fine-grained particles are often too small to see. Finer grains than sand are referred to as silt. The small clam-like fossils show that the shale was deposited in a shallow sea. So here is our purest evidence that there was a glacier here. This long, straight joint was created when the glacier melted and the burden was lifted and the thin rock cracked in a straight line. So here we have the straight line or linear fracture, and you can see down in the water there's more evidence of cracks in the rocks underwater. And then over here we see more layers of shale. As the glacier above the rock melted, the burden weight of the glacier released, and the rock cracked and eroded. Forces released pressure on the shale layer, creating thousands of fractures called joints. These joints represent weak areas in the shale, and when the glacial and the post-glacial forces met these joints, the water was able to easily erode the shale and cut a small gorge over the time span of several thousand years. This shows flat tops of the shale layers. Here's evidence of linear cracks again, as we look along the top of this streambed area. The flat shale rocks sometimes make it difficult for the trees to set their roots. Here is the trail ahead, but we are going to take a different, safer path. We will walk down to the creek bank and walk along the bank for a short distance. Then we will rejoin the trail. Walk down to the flat shale creek bank and head to the left. When you get close to the waterfall, walk up the rocks on the left, almost like a shale staircase. Take your time and be careful as you pass by the waterfall. We're going to walk along this little bank till we find this trail right over here. Here's the trail that you take to go back out of Glann Creek. This is the view at the top of the trail. And here we're turning the corner slightly, and there's the outlet to Highland Drive in Tioga Terrace, Apalachin, New York.